Jason West, Director of Sustainability for the City of Albany. Tack on 5 to 10 degrees for the urban heat island effect if you live in a city. A heat wave is defined as 3 or more days in a row above 90 degrees. Right now, we have, on average, about 10 days a year above 90. By the 2050s, it could be up to 30. By the 2080s, 50 days a year above 90. And that doesn't take into account the urban heat island effect. I'll give you one other way to slice this idea of heat and how much it's going to change over the next generation. The heat index, something you probably have heard about, that's a feels like temperature that you see on the news, on the weather report. That's a combination of heat and humidity. So on July 10th of this year, the highest heat index so far of 2024 hit 103 in the shade.
In Albany?
In Albany. That was right before the big heat wave that where it hit 100 degrees on the thermometer. But it was the heat index, the humidity combined with heat was hotter a week earlier. By the 2030s, again, so this year, hottest day, hottest heat index, 103 in the shade. In the 2030s, that might climb and we'd see 110 in the shade. By the 2050s, 117 in the shade. By the 2080s, when we have the temperature of Mississippi and Louisiana, it could hit 128 degrees in the shade, not counting the urban heat island effect. It's going to get very hot. Again, though, this is all if we stay on the path we're on now. If we make significant improvements, this future may not happen. More heat brings more storms and drought. The heat is what is the energy source for storms. So the hotter it gets, the more violent, more aggressive the storms become. Heat also leads to more evaporation, which means there's more water vapor in the air, which means when it does rain, it's going to rain more downpours, less kind of gentle summer rains. This is also going to be punctuated, though, by periods of drought. So what we're going to see is more rain overall in fewer storms, alternating with periods of dry weather. 12% more rain by the 2080s, and we already get quite a bit now. Sea level is a famous consequence of climate change, you're right? Heat expands the oceans because warm water takes up more space than cold water. Plus you get the melting glaciers, leads to sea level rise. The Hudson, being an arm of the sea, connected to the Atlantic, and being at a very low slope, is going to rise with the Atlantic. And in the Northeast, for reasons I won't get into, it's going to rise more than it would other places. By the 2080s, we may have the Hudson River 6 feet higher than it is today, at the high tide mark. And one of these days, I'm going to go put down a marker down at Corning Preserve to kind of show where that might be as an art project or something. There's other consequences, as you can imagine, when you have this changes this big. More heat means lower crop yields. So by 2050, for example, when we hit 10 billion people, we're going to have 20% less food. And all the problems that radiate, all the consequences of that radiate out. Disease is affected. Extreme heat makes strokes and heart attacks more likely, increases asthma rates, exacerbates mental illness, and it doesn't even take into account the new diseases we'll experience. As ecological zones shift north with the temperatures, the United States, maybe not here in Albany, but the United States will see diseases that we've never had to deal with before. Dengue, yellow fever, malaria. Diseases moving up from the southern latitudes. There's even impacts on the human brain, and I just bought a book on this, so I'm very excited to read it. 2 of them are, extreme heat leads to more aggressive behavior. You have summer crime waves. You have more domestic violence, assault, other violent crimes. And it also, strangely, lowers cognition. So in extreme heat, for those who are not able to get into AC, you're going to have people who are not thinking clearly and are more aggressive by some order of degree. So now that I've scared you, what can we do about this? Because there's a lot we can do about this. First, we can stop the bleeding. We can do, like the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. We can reduce emissions on the way to eliminating the use of fossil fuels altogether. It is absolutely technologically possible. It's simply a matter of political will. The answer to climate change, basically, is to electrify everything and make sure we get our power from renewables. New York State has actually set some targets for this. New York State has decreed that the state will be carbon-free, 100% carbon-free electricity by 2040. And carbon-free, it's a little bit of a term of art. That just means nuclear is included, because nuclear has its own problems, but it has no carbon emissions. So you can have nuclear as part of the mix. And that's a big debate in climate change circles. We also have promised to reduce fossil fuel use by 85% by 2050. So we have our targets, we have the technology. In New York, at least, there is political will. We have all the pieces. And in fact, we're halfway there. Because right now, the current grid mix for New York State is 50% natural gas, 20% nuclear, 20% hydropower, 4% wind, and 3% solar. So it's about 50-50 carbon-free, if you want to include nuclear, and natural gas. So we only have to deal with half of our energy supply, not the whole thing, which I find helpful. So what is Albany doing? What is the city doing? In terms of renewables, the city government uses 100% renewable energy for all city operations. We subscribe to a community solar farm to pay out to use solar for the remainder of our utility bills. We're exploring the solar potential of city property, and we are promoting community solar in the community. There are actually two companies, Power Market and Joe for Sun, that are offering between 10 and 20% discount on your utility bill in exchange for nothing if you sign up. You basically become part owner of a community solar farm, and you get some of the benefit of that in the form of a bill credit. We're also trying to electrify the city. We've undertaken energy audits of the 26 largest buildings and identified conservation measures. In fact, we've identified $30 million worth of them, and now we're just hunting for funding to implement. We will soon have installed 22 city-owned EV charging stations, not counting the 8 that the parking authority owns. We are participating in feasibility studies for something called thermal energy networks, which are basically underground pipes that use the constant temperature of the earth to heat and cool the building above. And the thermal energy network is a neighborhood linked to a single underground pipe, and they share that resource. So there are currently feasibility studies for Sheridan Hollow and the South End, and we'll see if they're feasible when the studies are done, but this is really, I think, the wave of the future. We've begun to electrify our fleet, our 600 and some cars in the city fleet. The mayor budgeted last year $11 million over 5 years for fleet electrification. We're already buying electric vehicles. I think my office has found grants for 6 of them so far. And we're commissioning a fleet electrification study to provide a roadmap to lay out exactly how and in what order we want to get this done. So work is progressing on fleet electrification as well. What we can do, part 2, it's called adaptation. We can prepare and adapt to the changes that are already locked in, because it's going to get warmer. Even if we stopped all fossil fuel use tonight, the changes, the fuel that we've burned in the past is still going to accumulate in the atmosphere over the next few decades and centuries. So how do we prepare for what's already coming no matter what happens? Again, this is where climate justice comes in pretty strongly. You know, what do you want to preserve and what do you want to preserve first are big questions. So in Albany, we are installing green infrastructure to handle increased flooding. Green infrastructure is the use of vegetated areas to capture stormwater before it can cause flooding on the impervious streets. So the water department does a lot of work on green infrastructure. We even have a constructed wetland by Woodlawn Park that absorbs a whole lot of rainwater when storms come through. We're installing tide gates on the sewer pipes discharging to the river so that it doesn't backflow in when the river gets high and flood our sewer system from the riverside. The Common Council right now is considering legislation requiring white roofs in all new construction and renovation. Not every roof, certain pitches, like the more flat roofs will be white. And that's, we did some number crunching on that showed that the benefit in the summer to utility bills, because the white roof reflects heat, it keeps your building cooler without AC. The benefits of that outweighs having a black roof in winter. Because basically, it's pretty simple if you think about it. In winter, the sun is low. So it's going to hit the side of the building more than the roof.
Right.
So it doesn't accumulate the heat as much as the white roof reflects in the summertime when the sun is above the buildings. So we're having that conversation with the Common Council now. Our office has helped expand the availability of cooling centers, and actually have worked with the libraries to see if it's feasible to get libraries listed as cooling centers when emergencies require it. And our DGS, Department of General Services, has been planting more trees, which is a silver bullet for climate adaptation and mitigation, right? It reduces emissions and helps deal with the consequences of heating. So we had a program announced a few years ago that we want to do 2,025 trees by 2025. So 2025 by 2025, we hit that target 3 years early. And we just keep planting trees. And DGS has actually, I believe just last year, got a $5 million grant to do more urban forestry work in the community. Now, it's a long laundry list, I know. To tie it all together, the city got a grant from the DEC to undertake a community-wide climate action plan. We put out the RFP. We're waiting to hear back from consulting firms. It's another couple of weeks before we get all the applications in, and then we'll decide who to hire, et cetera, et cetera. But our goal is to have net zero emissions by the year 2050, community-wide. Now, this cap will include an assessment of our vulnerabilities to climate, because those have been studied quite a bit, so we're just going to kind of review the other studies that have been done, pull out the Albany-specific things, a roadmap to reduce emissions, a roadmap on how to adapt to the changes that are coming no matter what we do. And actually we added into, because it's a tricky problem, a conceptual plan for on-street public EV charging. Because it's a difficult question to solve. I can get into that if you're curious. Climate change is the biggest problem our species is dealing with planet-wide right now. Albany is doing a lot. We do as much as we can. We do more than many other communities. But for every Albany, there are 10 or 20 or 100 or 1,000 communities that aren't doing much of anything. So we need to get our house in order. We need to get our community all on the same page. So I hope we can talk again when the climate action plan process becomes public and we have the public engagement aspect to it. But I wanted to leave you with a quote from a poem, one of my favorite poems, The Low Road by Marge Piercy. Because the only way that we are going to solve this problem is together, as kind of cliched as that sounds. So Marge Piercy wrote in the 1970s, "It goes on one at a time. It starts when you care to act. It starts when you do it again after they said no. It starts when you say we and know who you mean, and each day you mean one more." So I hope you have questions. I hope we have kind of an interesting discussion. And so I know there's a lot of, I've never given that particular speech before. As I was saying it, I realized there's a lot of statistics and numbers, so I hope it wasn't too dry, but yeah.
Not at all.
Qualitative, quantitative, we like that.
Need more storytelling, that's what I'm saying.
Yes, numbers don't hurt.
Yeah. Can I jump in and ask a question? Well, I have like 100 questions, but I'll ask one and give you guys a chance to at a time. But because I do talk to people about climate change a lot, and one concern that I hear raised in good faith is about the grid, and whether the grid can handle the electrification process and what we're doing to close the gap between the grid we've got now and the grid we're going to need to go fully electric with renewables.
Yeah, no, they're not wrong. The grid is decades out of date. And not just our grid, because there's no such thing as the grid.
It's a capacity.
Well, the country has like a dozen different grids. It's like we're in the upstate New York grid. We're not attached to New York City, for example. And actually our grid mix, New York State overall is half and half renewables and gas. Upstate New York is more like 70% renewables, because we get so much power from hydropower, from Niagara Falls, basically. I know that National Grid is obviously aware of this problem. They are making plans to harden the grid, make it more resilient, update it, as is every other grid operator in the country. It's not my area of expertise, but I do know that because it is so necessary, there's going to have to be funding, and a lot of it coming down from the federal government to help these utilities, as well as just their own self-interest and profit margin, right? And reinvesting some of the profits back into the infrastructure is just good business.
It's a lot of, actually, not just, my son works for National Grid, actually, and, I mean, not at a high level, but I mean at a medium level, and he actually went to National Grid after 25 years at Verizon, doing different kind of work. But this is exactly, what you're saying is exactly when I ask him to tell me, because they're exploring this and trying to figure out how to get there.
Right.
The infrastructure is so far out of date. It's such a big leap that whatever the climate action plan says in terms of dates, they can't meet it.
Right.
I mean, it's a funding issue, undoubtedly, but it's also more than that. I mean, there are other obstacles, too.
And just time, I would imagine. Just the
Yeah,
time it
well,
would take to
time,
get it
yeah,
fixed. Yeah.
But also how you build out from a structure that didn't have that capacity.
And one of the answers to this is battery storage, because one of the big problems with renewables, right? Wind is only producing electricity when it's windy, solar when it's sunny. So, and that's not at the same time that people are using all the power. You know, people use a lot of power at 5 p.m. 5 to 8 or 5 to 9 is a huge spike in energy use. So how do you store enough of that solar and wind power to make a difference for those peak times, and shut down some of these heavily polluting peaker plants that are invariably in low-income neighborhoods and causing their own raft of problems. But I know, NYSERDA is doing a lot of research on battery storage. There's funding out there for batteries. We haven't gotten into that. It's a little outside of our, a city's
Sure.
bailiwick. But I know that work is being done in that
A lot
area.
of pieces that have to come into play
Yeah.
before this 100% operation, so to speak, or other non-reliance on carbon occurs. And since we didn't pay attention to it early enough, or we postponed it for either
Right.
inaction because of government or whatever, now we're facing, it seems to me, I'm not saying what you think, I could ask you what you think about the time frame that we have set up for ourselves out of necessity, because the cumulative action of the consumption of all of these sources now means that we don't have any time anymore. You did say
Right.
that. We don't
Right.
have time anymore. Even if we want to be in the most hopeful mode, we don't have time to kind of push this off.
Yeah. What I didn't get into is that the state goals that were articulated in the CLCPA, we're not going to meet them.
Right. That's why.
Because there's just not the renewable, losing those gigawatts worth of wind power that were going to go, through the Port of Albany to Long Island, I think, the New York Harbor. That was a huge blow. But again, I mean, you can't, 10% inflation in a few years or whatever it was,
Well, that's why the governor's called this meeting in early September, hasn't she, for to reevaluate or to bring all the parties together to talk
Yeah.
about, like that.
Well, I do think, just to push back on this a little bit, the goals for the CLCPA
Right,
were
right.
very challenging right from the
Right,
get-go.
right.
And there has been industry pushback, some of which I think is good faith, the reality of the complexity of making these changes, and
Right.
some of it is not good faith.
Right.
I think National Grid and National Fuel out in the west of the state, I mean, there's been a lot of active disinformation about how impossible the transition is going to be, and so I really think we have to be alert to that. But I think the other thing we need to be thinking about is the cost of inaction. It's challenging and expensive to make this process happen, to make the green transition happen, but the incredible cost, we've had how many billion-dollar weather-related catastrophes just in 2024?
Yeah.
The last time I looked, it was 11, and that was a month ago. I bet there's been another one at least. So the costs of inaction, in my opinion, are greater than the costs of action.
And speaking of action, one thing that my neighborhood, Delaware, has tried to push for is collaborating with DGS to prioritize trees. Now, in terms of driving a project like that, we've provided a list of addresses that could house a tree. How do you recommend following up and ensuring that, that's actually delivered? I know money has been made available for disadvantaged communities, and Delaware, adjacent to Second Ave, it's a little bit of lack of a tree canopy. What kind of advice could you give to us to help push that?
One, I know the city arborist, Jay Levine, is insanely busy. So I know it can take a while for the wheels to get moving. But I would just, keep talking to DGS, keep talking to the Forestry Division. I would also mention that the city has an Adopt a Tree program where you can pay, I can't remember the dollar figure off the top of my head.
About half.
You pay for half the tree, is that what it is?
I believe it's waived at present.
Pardon?
I believe that's waived at present through DGS.
Is it?
Oh, really?
Yes.
Is it really?
So as long as you water it for a year or two, they'll come and plant one for you.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. to
And
know.
there's a list, on the website, there's a list of the species you can get. And they're all vetted for, they'll survive over the next few decades.
Get out of town, that is great news.
I guess no more silver maples or poplars, but
Yeah, exactly.
Getting back to Rob's question about planting along Delaware, is Radix a resource for those guys on Delaware or not?
Radix is a resource for the whole city, I think.
Yeah.
They do fantastic work.
They do fantastic.
And I know they're focused on the south end for obvious reasons. That neighborhood needs more help than many others. But I can't imagine Scott and Stacy saying, no, we're not going to give you some advice or help you out a little bit.
Except I don't think they have trees to sell. Or to
right,
give
and it's
away,
really a
right.
DGS project, and that's where the funding
Yeah.
goes. Was that both DEC and EPA funds?
I believe,
Correct.
yeah.
So,
I know Radix is working hard to do a food forest in the south end, so that should be interesting as things mature.
Right.
I know Scott was telling me that he has a tree in the backyard of the farm that he grafted like 5 different fruits onto one tree. So it grows like apples, pears, apricots, peaches, all on one tree. Yeah, so he's been experimenting with grafting.
Like that movie, what was that movie? Little Horrors? What was
Little
it?
Shop of Horrors.
What? The Little Shop of Horrors, yes, right.
Yeah, Audrey too.
You mentioned about a dozen grids across the country. That seemed small. Is that what you said, a dozen?
I'm picturing the map in my head. I can't count them, but many. Let me just say many grids. Yeah.
And even from a New York State perspective, the state is broken up in many different regions with different providers. Natural gas, for example, is going to be ported in. Different parts of the
Right.
state are going to have different access, so it's not one grid even for New York. In fact, that was a project I worked on in my career at DPS, Department of Public Service, where you have these multiple grids, but from a state level, how do you understand what's taking place in all of these different ecosystems? They're all siloed, you don't know, so one of the projects was how do you bring this together? And speaking of that, one thing I saw in that position was MHD and an emphasis on medium heavy-duty vehicles and increasing renewable in that sector.
Yeah, that
What's
sector's
the city
tough.
doing for our trash pickup?
They're just not, the technology isn't there yet.
Yep.
Is my guess. We're about to do a study. We'll see. I could be wrong. It's happened once before. But like garbage trucks, I've looked into them. They're about 400,000 for the diesel one, but 800,000 for an electric. Plus, you need 100,000 for the charger to charge something that big quickly enough for a 3-shift vehicle. So there's a lot of economics, a lot of logistics that are going into this. My guess is we're going to see a lot more electrification of medium heavy-duty vehicles at the end of the decade, late 2020s, early 2030s, because the technology is getting there, but it just hasn't hit that tipping point where it just becomes more economical. It's still in the pilot phase in a lot of places. New York City does it, but they're New York City. They have more money than anybody, so.
How do they get what are their sources of energy, of power?
They're heavily into natural gas, power plants. Yeah. Because, if you think about it, upstate grid, there's really 2 electric grids, right? There's the downstate and upstate grid. Upstate is about 70% renewables, and the state as a whole is about 50% renewables. So you figure that a lot of natural gas in downstate is dragging the average down. So.
Then when is the hydroelectric project that is originating in Canada going down to the city?
Oh,
When
that
does
I don't
come
know.
online?
I don't remember.
And then can I ask another question on a totally different subject?
Well, before we go on to different subjects, I just want to make a pitch for this great book called The Grid. It doesn't sound like it'd be interesting, but it is fascinating. And it starts with the first electrification with like Edison and those early companies. Like in the early days, people wanted a power plant in their basement because they didn't want to be in a neighborhood power system, because they want to control over their own power supply. So you'd have these like oil burning or coal burning power plants in the basement of your house in Manhattan or whatever, and the light bulbs were enormous. You know, it was just, and but you know, it talks about how we got to the way where we are now, and like some of the stagnation in the utilities, because the way they're funded, there's something about for every dollar that got spent, they got reimbursed by the federal government or somebody. So if you renovated the CEO's office and spent $10,000, you get that money back. So there's no incentive to innovate, is one of the arguments. Anyway, it's a fascinating book, and it goes into the solutions as well, you know, of what we need to do to make the grid more resilient. And we'll bring some to sell at
Oh, that would be
Melrose.
fantastic.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Anyway, so what was your question? about the
So
next one?
my question was, well, I have a comment and then I have a question, but just understanding like how the grid works, Climate Reality and some other people from Albany Sustainability Committee did, we got a tour of the New York State independent system operators, so for me, it was absolutely revelatory, like 2 hours of just being shown how the electrical grid across the state works. And you can actually see it in action. It was just an unbelievable education, I feel like. I don't know how easy it is for them to do tours, but that's something we should consider doing as a Council of Neighborhood Associations.
Where are they located?
Right across the river.
Oh,
Yeah, even I didn't get lost going there. So.
wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, oh, it was, and I don't know how hard it is to get tours there because Tina organized it.
I heard the security was brutal to get in, because you don't want anyone messing with that,
You
you
don't want
know?
anyone messing with that, but holy cow, it was, what an education that was. So that's something we might want to
Do they have their
consider.
own campus or something?
Yeah, they do.
Oh, okay.
And then they have another campus that's like a
High-wire
backup
fences.
campus.
I
yeah.
see, yeah.
The question is, when you're talking about this upcoming study and community involvement in that, can you talk a little bit about what that might look like?
Sure.
And how people could get involved?
Yeah, we want, in the RFP, we did put in that we want a significant public engagement process, you know, one of the linchpins of the whole project. No offense meant, but I've been explaining it as, I'd like to do more than a tour of the neighborhood associations and a public charrette. So I don't know what that looks like. We want to, you know, if it was my personal project, I could do whatever I want. I'd get that billboard on 787, I'd get the bus wraps. I don't know what I want them to say, but I want them to say something about, you know, the problem and our solutions. But, you know, maybe get art involved. We don't know. We're going to talk to consultants about what their ideas are and come up with a plan. But we have resources to devote to public engagement. So we definitely do want to do a tour of the neighborhood associations, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I just don't want to stop there.
Is there a way for like individual citizens to like
There will
part
be.
of that process?
There will be, yes.
Good.
I think prehistory, the methane event.
Yeah.
What you were talking about. So that had nothing to do with greenhouse gases, it just,
No, it did. There's a, they call it the Permian extinction. And it was one of the mass extinctions. It was the one before the dinosaurs, like a couple 100 million years ago. But in that case, it was something like volcanoes in Siberia were erupting for like 1,000 years, and then it acidified the oceans, which caused methane to bubble up. It cascaded, but it unspooled across tens of thousands of years. It was slow, you know. So our problem is,
something trapping.
yeah, it was released a lot of methane, a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which created the same kind of blanket around the planet. And actually, it's surprising, but there are more than one mass. I think that we're in the middle of the 6th mass extinction. There's been more than one due to climate change.
Right.
The only difference is now it's an organism on Earth causing it, and not a volcano in the ocean. You
And
know,
over a short, much shorter.
and
period of time,
over
as you
a
pointed
couple
out,
hundred years, not a couple
that it's-
tens of thousands.
it's
I think the other thing with methane, you know, one of the, I think, best arguments for getting off fossil fuels and electrifying everything and powering it with heat, with wind and solar, and maybe nuclear. I think there's good faith differences of opinion
I took
on
no
that.
position on that.
Yeah, but the problem with natural gas is from the very moment that it is fracked or extracted from the ground, through the whole processing of it, through all the pipelines, all the way through to the place where it actually hooks up to your gas furnace or your gas stove, that methane is leaking the whole entire time. And we are now just only recently beginning to realize how bad that leakage problem is. And methane is much, much, much
Right.
more of a warming
Yeah.
molecule, because it's, you know, than carbon dioxide is over a 20-year period.
I believe it's
So like-
88 times
yeah,
as
something like
powerful.
that, 87, 88. And so that's why methane is almost like, over the very, very short term, almost a bigger problem, really.
Well,
than
that's
carbon
where that book
dioxide.
comes into play, the one that I mentioned to both of you about the title. The
landfill one, yeah?
No, it's the one.
That Jonathan Farrell.
Yeah, Jonathan Farrell, right, because he addresses
Oh, with the
the whole
weather,
issue.
We
Yeah,
Are the Weather.
We Are the Weather. We Are the Weather is interesting in the title, because the title does, I never made the connection between what the subject was, but the subject of this book is that it isn't the problem of carbon dioxide so much as the problem of methane, and methane related to agriculture production, and that means that we have to alter our way of eating. We have to go to a plant-based diet, rather. He doesn't go into the ethics of eating animals. It's the sheer production, animals.
And cows
Agriculture,
is what it is,
cows.
really.
Yeah.
Cattle. Cattle
exactly.
burp methane.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of cattle
exactly.
burping.
If we, but I don't know, when I think of the whole problem of how we address this big issue, that seems to be even a bigger problem than whether we go to fuel, our vehicles that are powered by other methods, but addressing the idea of diet in human beings, because we're wedded to a meat-based diet. And that's the whole production.
This may be controversial for in my trade, but I'm not convinced that individual action makes a big difference. As isolated individuals, a very big caveat. Organizing together in groups, that's what makes the change. But, you know, what I learned, for example, that two things that really change the way I think. One is that something crazy like 80% of all emissions ever are the result of like 20 corporations. And, you know, and then you throw in the militaries, which are huge emitters of
exactly.
greenhouse gas emissions. But then I found out that the term carbon footprint was invented by British Petroleum to try to shift the guilt burden onto the individual. Like, it's your fault. This is, you know, not us. This is you, John. You're the one who's doing this. What's your carbon footprint, John? You know,
Speaking of
not like
disinformation.
BP's just enormous, like, you know, county-sized footprint. You know, but anyway, so I just and I usually have a bit when I talk about, you know, what you can do, and I forgot to add it to this one. But I mean, we live in the state capitol. Community groups can get together and teach each other. You know, there's the Citizens Climate Lobby. You know, that can teach people how to do it right and
Well, since I
work
still live
as
in my own
groups.
home, which is a single-family home, probably much too large for me. Today, I had some women friends for lunch, and I was looking for a plastic container to give them some leftover food. And I brought out this container that I have, you know, a little box, and that's only the first of many. I have resolved, I do get these plastic containers. I go to the grocery store. I mean, everything we get comes in a plastic container. I can't take everything that I need for refillable. But I will not put those in the city trash. So because I still live in a single-family home, I can have every room in my house filled up with plastic bags full of it. It's laughable. But I won't put those in my trash anymore.
Yeah.
And my friends looked at me like I had three heads, and I said, no, sometime in the future, somebody's going to come up with a method where we can recycle those plastic containers that you get at the deli, all the yogurt containers and everything else, but I won't throw them away.
Right.
I won't throw them there.
And there's
It's
good
my
reason. There's good reason to do this.
It's
You know,
my
there's
contribution, and I'm probably, three heads. But if you come up with a solution. what I can
I'll
do-
figure something out. Let me think about
The
it.
bin, it won't work in there? The recycling bin?
No, I'm talking about what happens when, I can put them in there, but when they'll go to the landfill. There is no solution to that plastic.
Plastic.
Yeah.
I mean, they haven't come up with that.
And there's a great organization, Beyond Plastics,
Yeah.
that is run by Judy Enck, who's right over the river.
Yeah, well, I mean, she's arguing the same thing that
Yeah.
I'm arguing, but nobody's saying you should store this in your house.
Right.
Clean as it is, and it's all clean. It goes to the dishwasher or washed by hand. But I simply refuse.
And the delis probably wouldn't take it back.
No, you cannot. There is no way you can reuse it. In fact, you can even, if you want to go to the Honest Way Co-op and take a jar for, say, buy your bulk produce, that's okay. It has to be a glass container. You can't take plastic because it cannot be sanitized enough for their purposes.
Right.
So it's it's not a hopeless situation. But I still maintain I will find the solution.
Methane, I was reading somewhere at one time the Albany landfill was selling the methane because it can be used for energy. So is that a common thing? Is that a good thing?
It is. They call it green hydrogen. Or is it hydrogen?
Really?
CH4. It's not hydrogen. Green methane, I guess.
You mean like
But they capture it.
capturing the methane and using it as a power source?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they sell it. They collect it and then sell the stored. It's not as good a product as the stuff that you frack right out of the ground. It's got more moisture in it and things like that. But that's happening at the Rapid Road landfill right now.
At the landfill,
Yeah.
of course.
And who is buying that methane?
I don't know. It's a DGS project, so I'm not involved with that details of that one.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
There must be some constructive use for it then, some positive use for it, right? Methane?
Well,
To
except that
conversion into something.
it's still then you're burning it, and that's.
Well, in this case, it's either going to
It's what's
be burned
generated.
off from the landfill
Yeah.
or used to power a machine and
Right.
burned off that way.
Yeah.
So it's getting burned off one way or the other.
Yeah.
So,
But better to not produce it in the first place.
Right,
rather
right,
than Not bring in.
by having composting, by having recycling,
Right.
by having all that to reduce the volume of waste in the landfill.
Are you familiar with the rhetoric surrounding solar panels and greenfield development versus brownfield? It seems as though there's a impression that farmable agriculture space is being used to house this infrastructure versus, like a brownfield. Are you
Yeah.
familiar with any of that?
Yeah, and it's forestry too, not just agriculture. People cutting down trees to build solar panels. And there's a calculus to it. You get more benefit out of the solar panels than the trees. And if your goal is climate change, slowing climate change. The greenfield versus brownfield is tough because, you want to keep that prime agricultural land agricultural. But on the other hand, we need clean energy, and it's not cost effective to put it on buildings all the time. So it's much cheaper to build a big rack on a green flat field than it is, for example, for us to build the steel structures to put it on top of a parking garage. You just don't get the returns, so companies don't want to do it. So, and for better or worse, that's the engines we have to deal with. I guess nonprofits could probably operate one at a loss or break-even point, but it just doesn't happen.
Controversy? I don't understand.
So the idea is you're using agricultural space for this infrastructure versus a brownfield, which has very little output.
Right,
in
except
terms
you
of
have to
potential.
clean up the brownfield before you could use, or would, no, you would use it for solar.
Would you even, right?
Yeah,
Just
so you
put
would
it
put
there.
solar panels on the brownfield, as that is?
Right, the idea
Oh.
of, urban versus more rural.
Right.
Are we,
Well, that would make sense, doesn't it?
where are we putting this development? It seems like more rural communities are dealing with the fracking or dealing
Yeah.
with the extractive nature of renewable or any
But it's a
energy.
constructive use for.
Putting the windmill.
But it's not an either or. There's a field now, it's a growing, no pun intended, growing field called agrivoltaics.
Yeah.
Where there's certain shade-loving plants, pumpkins, squash, I think, I can't remember the
I
others.
think they like sun. but
I
that's
can't
okay.
remember. There's some out there. I'm not a good gardener.
But
there are
something that would like it.
There are vegetables that light would do better under, maybe something like that, under the shade of a solar panel, they would do better than they would necessarily out in a full sun field. The partial sun plants would like it.
And then, and also combining that, and there are projects like this, and it is a burgeoning, I'm glad you brought it up, because it's a burgeoning field now, but not just growing, edible plants, but also using that to like rewild areas so that they become insect habitats, and then also integrating livestock in them. So there's a lot of good, I think, stuff happening in that area.
I know you can't use goats to chew the grass out from under the solar panels because they'll eat the conduit too. It's not a good, not a good. But we actually looked into this as we were going to do a demonstration project at Norman's Kill Farm. We're looking, at, like I mentioned, we're exploring properties for solar that the city owns. That big south-facing hill at Norman's Kill down by the community gardens would have been perfect.
Right.
That, for technical reasons, just wasn't.
Oh, really?
It would involve alienating parkland and.
What about all the parking lots?
Yeah. Well, I'll get to that too. But we did look at something down by the community gardens for solar array and agrivoltaics. Thought it would be a nice addition to the school field trips when they go to the blacksmith and they go to the farm buildings and all that. Yeah. But we did also look at the parking garages, riverfront garage, well, all of them really. And the price of steel for the supports was exorbitant, so the math didn't work for that.
I wonder whether this next generation of solar panels that are using like ceramics to really up their efficiency, I wonder if then that would change. Would that offset the cost of the steel?
Maybe.
If they were...
For a couple of years, I saw a lot about flexible film solar, but I haven't seen anything about that in a couple of years. I always did like the idea of like an electric car completely covered in solar, just as like part of the skin of the vehicle. But I saw some demonstration things, like someone came up with a pilot, but I don't think it went anywhere.
So in terms of batteries and storage, I know one of the local institutes here, the Nano School, have had a number of friends go through that program, one of which studied batteries. I wonder if there's an opportunity to get different sorts of conversations going. I know, maybe through city government and the education, you can get some different dialogues going. Have you looked into any of that?
I haven't, though I think we're going to have to in the coming years because of DGS and the police, which are 3-shift vehicles each, which leaves you very little time to charge something. So having, and then you have the problem of power outages, and do we want to use diesel generators to power our electric vehicles? Having a battery rack might be a better option. So I think that those are the kind of things I'm hoping that the fleet electrification study digs into a little bit.
I think also as EV cars improve, now if, say, like a Tesla gets what, 280 per charge, if EVs advance to the point where they're getting like 500 miles per charge, I think that simplifies some of that calculus too. They won't need as much charging.
I mean, the next 10 years are going to be tricky because in 2035, 3 of the major auto manufacturers say they're going to stop producing ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles. In 2035, the state of California and New York, it will be illegal to buy a new internal combustion engine in 2035. I can't remember the other states, but I know California and New York are 2 of them. So basically, we're looking at a 10-year transition for the most part. There'll still be second-hand cars, that'll be years and years and decades before that works its way through the system, right? But then you have that reality, and then you have the reality that in New York State, at least, it's illegal to park a gas car in an EV charging spot. So, for example, if we wanted to put 5 EV charging spots on Lark Street, there would be torches and pitchforks, right? If you basically take away parking from gas cars, it causes problems.
Park Street,
I see.
So that's why we've been putting them in parks, for example, the charging stations. It's just, I shouldn't have picked on Lark Street. I guess any spot where parking is at a premium is going to be difficult to maneuver those EV charging spaces into the existing until, there's a critical mass of EV drivers who are demanding it.
Right.
And so the kind of neighborhood dynamics are going to be very interesting for the next 10 years as we kind of move away from gas and diesel and towards electricity.
That's such a great point. I hadn't thought about that. That's a really interesting.
And that's why, and look, think about EV charging, right? Every EV comes with a charging cable. It charges overnight, more or less, right? It's a trickle charge. If you have a driveway or a garage, no problem. But if you live in a brownstone on State Street, what are you going to do? Hang a 300-foot extension cord out the window to across the sidewalk to your car? Like, no, you can't do it. So there's a combination of market forces and good public policy that are getting more EV charging. Like I said, the city is going to, we're once we finish this round, we'll have 22, not counting APA. But they're all over the place. The AAA on Delaware, all the car dealerships have them, hotels have them, the grocery stores have them, Walmart has it. So they're growing,
Sure.
but we don't have a critical mass network yet. So, but what we need is, when we talk about public EV charging, we're basically talking about the eastern half of Albany, right? Because the western half of Albany is more single-family homes. So you're fine. You can plug it into your garage, or you can pull in your own driveway and have an extension cord.
You have a 200-volt line, right? I mean,
You can do it on a 120. It just doesn't charge as much.
oh, do you?
Yeah, you want. I mean, if you got the money, doubling the charge is helpful.
Right, so I understand.
But again, for those people who live in apartment dwellers, where do they charge? So it's a tricky problem. That's why, as part of our RFP for the Climate Action Plan, we asked the consultant to include a conceptual plan for how one might solve this
Right.
issue.
And I think educating people about what's at stake, I always feel like the more people know, the more open to reason they are. So there's that piece of it. But I also think, one thing I hear a lot from people is like, oh, the EV market isn't really growing here, it's not really going to happen. But there was an article in the Times a month or so ago, and it was about EV cars in China. And between 2019 and 2024, their EV production increased 85-fold. And they are now are producing several different cars that you can buy for $12,000, and they're EVs. And so, I think to the degree that people say, oh, it's always going to be about combustion engines, I don't think they realize like the rest of the world is like speeding forward.
They used to say that
so-
about horses.
What's that?
They used to say that about horses. You're never
Yeah.
going to replace the horse.
Right. And then in 10 years, like in 1895, it was all horses, and in 1910, it was like
Right.
all cars.
Yeah. And some of the first cars were electric.
Yeah. And remember, there was an electric car that GM killed. Remember their campaign?
I remember that. There was a documentary about that, I
Yeah,
think.
there
Yeah.
was,
Who killed the electric car?
Yeah.
In terms of revenue, is public EV, is that a revenue generator for the city?
Yeah, not a ton of money. We have 8 chargers installed right now, and another 14 in process. So I think that 8, maybe 10 grand a year.
I think that's a great thing to think about, though. I mean, I think that's a great
Has
point
been,
to
yeah.
emphasize, that it is
Yeah.
bringing some money, and it's not a net loss. That's a good
Yeah,
point.
and the more we build, the more we make. So
Yeah. And then also, again, getting back to that thing of like, yes, taking action is costly, but not taking action is going to be massively more costly.
Yeah.
And what's interesting? We have 8 charging stations, one outside Radix, one at 200 Henry Johnson, 2 at Corning Preserve, 2 at Swinburne Park, 1 at Ridgefield Park, and 1 on Corning Place next to City Hall. Corning Place blows them all out of the water in terms of usage.
Is that 30-minute parking?
I don't know. No, I don't know what it is. But it's the one next to City Hall. I mean, like triple the use of any other charger we have.
Wow.
Is it very interesting? Maybe state workers nearby. I don't know what.
Also, I think it is time parking right there, right?
No, on Corning, it's all reserve parking. That's all like the mayor's office and the judges and stuff.
I see.
And so we just took over 2 of those spots. So there's no time limit.
Oh, really?
It's just you can stay there until you're done.
So that augurs well, I think, for increasingly having chargers around at other parts, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
especially the Lark Street example, right, where parking's a premium, which it is there, you generate a lot of revenue.
Well, here's an interesting example then, because in our next round, and I'm not telling you anything that wasn't public, but there were some very strong, very serious concerns by the Conservancy and the Neighborhood Association about putting 3 chargers in that little turnaround in the northeast corner of Washington Park. You know, that little spot? Basically the corner of State and Willett.
Yes, stay well.
So there was some concerns. It's not historic. It doesn't. It doesn't fit with the kind of feel of the park. And I get that. You know, I have a degree in history. I love that kind of stuff. But you know, that seemed, when we first proposed that site, like a perfect solution to the Lark Street problem.
And to be clear, that was a cemetery. So in terms of trying to preserve the space, that park was a cemetery. Yes, Washington Park?
Oh,
Yep,
really?
Yep, oh, yeah.
The,
So many bodies were exhumed and brought over to rural.
And dropped. Don't forget that.
and dropped?
Yes.
So many weren't even taken out.
Many weren't taken out, and the tombstones were dropped in between here and Menands because they were moving them from here into the Menands cemetery.
Albany
Only reason
Rural.
that was because I came from Spanish Harlem, moved to Menands, and the kids had stories, and then they wound up being true. And then a bad nickname for the basketball court over there is called the graveyard for the kids that go there in the community, and that's why they call it the graveyard, because it really is.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, isn't the whole thing?
The dog park was.
You can
Yep,
kinda-
cemetery. Not that portion that you're talking about, but
But-
at a point it was, so.
More importantly, are there ghost stories involving this
I was
cemetery?
just playing. I didn't see anything, I ignored it. They don't pay no mortgage. I'm gonna come out here and pay that mortgage.
When's the RFP coming out? It's to come, right?
End of August.
And that's when it's being sent out?
No, it's published now.
Oh,
That's why I
okay.
can talk about
Oh,
it,
that's
but
when you'll-
I can't say anything more about it
Right.
because it's
In the process.
in process.
But the deadline is August for replying to it.
Yeah, so we should, we'll know by we'll have meetings by the end of August. We'll start to have an idea of who might be a contender, I think. That's just my guess, I don't know.
So in terms of sea levels and opening water access in the city, how would you imagine a canal being impacted potentially by?
I think it makes a canal unworkable, right? Because, wait, how would, no, now I'm not picturing it right. Wouldn't you have to excavate down below grade? So you need locks
Yeah, I think
to
so.
have a
Where are
canal.
they gonna dig up the original
Remember, there's a couple
lot?
different ideas.
Yeah.
Was that Broadway, down by SUNY Admin, and then over by Central Warehouse?
Yeah, what are they going to talk about, a marina right in front of Central Warehouse?
Potentially
Is
Lock
there?
1,
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lock.
the original Lock 1.
Yeah, so you have to dig out.
Yep.
Yeah.
What are you saying? What are they going to find down there? or-
Oh, I don't know, I'm just trying to wonder, like,
Logistics of how to.
yeah, I love the idea, like, as a thought exercise, but I don't know how, I don't have an opinion on it because I have no idea if it's workable.
It's hard to imagine rising sea levels, and then how do we open up water access within the city?
I guess it would make it easier, right? Because if Broadway's here and the river's here now, raise the river up a little, we got to excavate it less far down.
Right.
Yeah, and you know, the crazy part about all this is that we don't really know. Like, those numbers I gave you are just the middle to high most plausible thing for the next few decades.
Projections, right.
But it depends on 2 things that we can't quantify. Well, more than that. One is there are certain things that that are too complicated for scientists to model. Like, we don't know the impact of clouds
Yeah.
on climate change, which has a big impact, shade and water vapor and all this. There's the permafrost, right, at northern latitudes, which locks in tons of methane and carbon dioxide. As the planet heats up, that permafrost warms and releases all those gases that have been trapped there for who knows how long. But scientists don't know how fast that happens, or when, or if it would even happen. So we don't know about the melting glaciers in Antarctica, how fast that might happen, or whether it might happen. So there's certain complicated things.
It's happening, like even.
Well, it's happening, but is the Thwaites Glacier going to break off in 2050 or 2500? We don't have enough data. The other big unknown with this whole topic is human behavior. You know, what is humanity going to do when it starts to heat up? You know, are we going to, we could go, I don't know, authoritarian as a response. Like, think about the Depression after World War II, right? You had countries in Europe going authoritarian. You had the U.S. going further into democracy. So, you know, that's going to impact results. You know, is it? I don't know. Like, what does all of humanity do when we're all in crisis at the same time? How do we behave? Where do we turn? Where do we run? You know? Do we just put on blinders and say, I can't handle this? Do we get out? Is it going to provoke mass movements of people demanding change? Who knows?
I think it's that.
That last one?
I have hope.
I think that's the last one too. I have hope too.
Any
I
more
mean, I
questions?
feel like we could do this all night long.
Yeah, I got nowhere to
Great
be.
dialogue,
What time is it? 8?
8 o'clock. That-
This has been so wonderful. I feel like I
Yeah,
learned
yeah,
Good.
so much. I really learned a lot.
Well, it was, I will say it was not my best performance, so come see me speak again, and once I practice it.
in post-production, right?
Yeah.
Have another chance.
Yeah, it's going
And
to
at
come together
M&A,
well.
Jason's gonna bring books to sell
Oh,
on
they will,
climate.
yeah, right.
And we have cookies. As Amy knows.
Are you at the Pine Hills branch, or?
We are, you know, where we meet is All Saints Catholic Academy.
Oh, on the corner there by-
Yeah, yeah, right.
And when is that?
September 17th.
All right.
What do you call the section of houses behind there with like the, was it the Spanish-style homes, right? Isn't it
Oh,
right there?
those are, yeah,
Yeah. Does it have a name, or is it just
It
Melrose?
should, because they're so cool.
Yeah, they're really neat.
Yeah, they're really cool. I've always wanted to, I don't know anybody who lives there, but every time I walk
you gotta-
by, I'm like, oh, I'd love to see what the inside.
You gotta tell them about the cookies.